Hey guys, Lindsay here.
And Marissa.
It's Friday, so here is our video for a couple of gays.
So last week we were talking about a video about feminine lesbians. And so we talked about a lot of spectrums. And what you guys don't know about us is that when we get done with a video and we start talking about this stuff, we can talk about like a whole nother subject for like an hour afterwards. So in that hour after, when we were processing this video, we started talking about bisexuality, which makes sense because we're talking about spectrums and what lies in between those spectrums. And of course, on the sexuality spectrum, bisexuality falls in the middle. And Lindsay has some very strong feelings about bisexuality, which is actually quite humorous because I identify as queer, but the reason why I do that is because, you know, I dated men in my life, and so I don't identify with being bisexual necessarily, but
she is.
But essentially I am. So it's like, it's just funny because it's like she has all these feelings about bisexuality. And so the next day, the conversation followed to the next day, and we started talking about this subject again. And we finally got to the point where Lindsay feels like she can tell you why exactly she has a problem with bisexuality.
No, listen. I don't actually have a problem with bisexuality. That is not true.
Okay, but you did until you came to the assessment.
Well, yes.
Okay, that's my point. Is that you came to this.
I also didn't, like, while I have these feelings, I wasn't like anti-bisexual. I know this subject has been going on for a little bit, and there was like a
continue going on.
And there was a heated debate kind of going on between lesbians and bisexual ladies. But a lot of the feelings that I had were like, yes, valid, that all the lesbians are saying. But then I got to thinking, because Marissa kept picking at me, nitpicking, and I actually think that I have something to say about it now. I don't actually have a problem with bisexual women at all. Or bisexual men, either one. But for dating, I don't have a problem with bisexual women. I have a problem with how society views their relationship when it's with a woman versus when it's with a man. And it's not the actual bisexual woman who is the problem, it's society that's the problem. When a woman is in a relationship with a woman, it's seen very differently and subversive rather than if it's with a man and you just get heterosexual privileges that are unspoken, right?
Essentially, Lindsay is explaining heteronormativity.
Yes, and I don't like it, and that's why I have an issue with it. It's not actually the person, it's actually society and how their relationship would be validated versus my potential relationship with a woman would be validated.
She speaks the truth. Okay,
and that's what I have a problem with.
There is truth there. And there is truth in that, and I totally validate that. But I do have a sticking point in that. So all of that is very true, and heteronormativity is very real. But my problem with her conversation is that when you're talking about bisexuals, the language you use, not you, but in general, changes, right? So, and I was telling you that one day, like when a lesbian, someone who's identified as a lesbian or someone who's identified as straight goes out and is like, I want to find a loving relationship. People are like, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. The person you're going to be with is the person you're going to fall in love with. But when we talk about bisexuals, all of a sudden it's like, well, what, then they're going to be with a woman or they're going to be with a man, and they're all willy-nilly, and they're not actually looking for someone to love. They're actually like, I don't even know how people talk about them, but it's like they can switch or just go between however they want. And like, if they want the privilege, they're going to date a boy. And if they don't want it, they want to be subversive, they're going to date a girl. And unfortunately, that's really an untrue thing. I mean, bisexuals, although increase their pool twofold because they could fall in love with a man or a woman and they're open to that, does not mean that they're not looking for love, and they're going to find love in either sex. And that bothers me, because even you will talk about it and be like, oh, well, if they're with a man, then they're this way, and if they're with a woman, well, they're this way. And it's like, well, they're going to be with the person they love. And yes, if they choose to love a man and they're in a heterosexual relationship, privilege is going to come with that. And yes, if they were going to be with a woman, that's more of a challenge. But that doesn't mean that they're openly being like, well, I'm going to choose this or I'm going to choose that. They're going to choose the person that they fall in love with, just like everyone else.
Yes, and I get that. Like, I have no problems with bisexuals at all. Like, I have no qualms with them. It's the privilege that they get if they start dating a man and then it's not on them, actually. It's just, that's what society does.
Right, but do you feel the same way about heterosexuals as you feel about bisexuals?
No, because I wouldn't date a straight woman.
If you happen to be, no matter who you are, if you happen to be attracted to a more feminine bodied person and they happen to be either identify as bisexual or identify as straight, some of them do identify as straight.
Well, they're on the spectrum.
Then, this is where some of the problem happens with lesbians who date women like that, because they don't feel secure in the relationship, and then the woman who either identified as straight or identified as bisexual ends up breaking up with them and either dating another woman or a man. And this frustrates lesbians. Right?
Why are you asking me?
Because I'm asking you about the discussion. When we first started talking about this
right.
is the discussion we had.
Right.
And then as we evolved and I asked more questions and picked and prodded and picked and prodded, you came to this privilege thing. But when we first started, it was about...
They're wishy-washy.
Essentially, that's what you said. They're wishy-washy.
And I don't mean it so flippantly, but but as we started picking at it, it does get down to the fact of my relationship with this person would not be validated as it would be if I were a man.
It's kind of hard to talk about bisexuality when that's the point. Because you're already talking, like, we had this whole discussion about this stuff, and we went back and forth, and now you're starting the discussion at the end.
Well, I don't know what else to say. I mean...
I know, but that was the point. We've processed through the whole thing so well that by the time you get to your point, it's like, right. And we're done. I'm sorry, honey. I'm just saying it's hard to have a discussion with you about it now because you've come all the way to the conclusion, which is a good conclusion. But now, what? I mean, that's like a really good conclusion. So now we're at this point where you have this really good conclusion and there's nothing else to say about it.
Well...
I think that we've solved bisexuality.
Apparently, we processed too much before this video because now we're just... saying the same things over and over.
No, I'm not saying the same things over and over. You've just processed to the point where
there's
and
a
this
conclusion.
Is actually right, but this is actually good because last week I was trying to make the point that some of these conversations become null and void when you really break it down. Right? When you don't use the language and the binary, some of these questions and conversations just become null and void. And so I think now we've also proven that if you break down your feelings about bisexuality, you can actually come to a larger conclusion that makes the original question null and void. Because the original question running around the internet was what?
Do lesbians hate bisexuals? Or something around, not to the, but why do lesbians and bisexuals not get along? I don't remember the exact thing.
Right. But it was something to the effect of like...
lesbians versus bisexuals, essentially.
Right. And so when I mean, you can break that down in so many ways, but we've broken it down in a way that puts you in that, heterosexuals have privilege. It's called heteronormativity. Heteronormativity. And it exists, and it's real, and it can cause you to believe that bisexuals are bad people. Isn't it terrible? When you really think about it, isn't it terrible that the societal pressure of heteronormativity can actually make you dislike a whole swath of people?
But that's true for a lot of things.
I know, but it's not so disjointed. I mean, yeah, you have racism and sexism and all of those isms, but when you're thinking about it, like, if you're having a discussion with a lesbian and they're like, I don't like bisexuals because they're wishy-washy or whatever, I had a bad experience or we didn't, whatever. isn't that funny how that can, if you break that all the way down, it can come to the conclusion that it has to do with privilege and heteronormativity, which typical people wouldn't come to that conclusion. I mean, they'd stay on the level of being like, well,
I just don't like them.
Well, you just don't like them, or you just don't understand them, or you just don't, you know, and it all sort of centers around this group that you don't get, when in reality, it's about a group outside of yourself that's creating a vision of the world, making it difficult for you to have a relationship with somebody who's a bisexual. I find that to be really interesting. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, because there is, like you said, there is racism and there is
But
other
that's all very
isms,
clear
but it's
and
very
blatant,
clear,
like-
like, I don't like this person because they're
black.
or
I
they're
don't like this person
a
because
woman,
they're
or,
white. And you're like, right, you're racist, or you're homophobic, or you're sexist.
Right.
But, like, if you're like, gee, I just don't like bisexuals, no one's going to be like,
Heteronormativity
heteronormativity is
privilege.
causing you distress. No one's going to say that because it is so, like, ingrained in us that a whole swath of people can... Hudson, very close. A whole swath of people can change your view of society so much that you end up having issues with... Hudson's really into me right now.
Snuggles.
Anyways...
Wow, Hudson.
He's like almost on me. Hudson also doesn't like it because he's a man. And so when I talk about patriarchy or heteronormativity, he gets really nervous. He's one of only 2 boys in the house, and the cat doesn't care about anything. We have to stop talking now because Hudson's having feelings.
We have to go process with him now.
To process with him. But I think the larger question here is heteronormativity is a powerful force. Think about it.
This has been our video for a couple of gays. So we will see you guys next week.
Bye.